يا سيد أنا رجعت على لبنان، أتمنى أنك ترجع كمان على لبنان.
قرار صادر من مجلس الجامعة تسمية حزب الله الإرهابي.
Good afternoon, you're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's headlines. British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond meets with Lebanese officials in Beirut and vows continued support for the Lebanese army. A diplomatic source says Russia has promised future movement leader Saad Hariri to help resolve Lebanon's presidential deadlock. And Lebanon receives 3 helicopters worth $26 million from the U.S. to help bolster the army's capabilities to fend off militant threats. British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond says Lebanon has played an important role in the front against terrorism, vowing continued support for the country's military. After meeting with Prime Minister Tamam Slam, the UK officials said they discussed Lebanon's overall political and economic situation and the Syrian refugee crisis. Hammond later visited the Hamat military base in North Lebanon, where he announced that Britain's financial commitments to the special training program for the Lebanese army will be raised to 19.8 million British pounds over 3 years. He also had talks with Foreign Affairs Minister Gibran Bassil.
I have been able to reaffirm the UK's long-standing support to Lebanon's security, stability and prosperity. I thanked Foreign Minister Bassil for his constructive contributions to the London conference on Syria a few weeks ago. And I particularly welcomed the STEP proposal, short-term employment programme, which recognises that by making refugees more self-sufficient, we can both lighten the burden and help stimulate the economy in ways which benefit all people, refugees and the host community alike, while acknowledging that, of course, refugees are our temporary guests while the situation in their own country stabilises, and we underline the importance of creating the conditions in Syria that will allow the refugees to return once it is safe for them to do so and take part in the rebuilding of their country.
Lebanon is an important part of the front line against terrorism, and we are delighted to be able to work with the Lebanese government, including in implementing the plan that was agreed at the London Syria conference a few weeks ago with regard to Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And I discussed with the Prime Minister how we can operationalise those plans over the coming weeks. Training in action, see how UK forces are working with the Lebanese armed forces to help increase this country's security. This is a long-standing programme. We've been here for 6 years now. 6,000 Lebanese troops have been through the programme here at this training village, and that this programme sits alongside the support that we're giving to the land border regiments in constructing watchtowers along the border and delivering training to help to make the Lebanese border more secure. Again, a programme which has been very effective. I spoke this morning with General Hawaji, who explained how effective that programme is delivering. I'm pleased to be able to announce today that on top of the £7.7 million we've already announced to equip the 4th Land Border Regiment as it's raised, a further £15.3 million for the training of the border regiments through to 2019, and on top of that another £4.5 million for the general training of the Lebanese armed forces through this training village here. That'll take another 5,000 troops through this training programme that we've seen demonstrated here this morning. We're immensely proud of the support that we've been able to give to the Lebanese armed forces, and delighted with the good use to which they've put these resources, delivering real additional security both in the internal security of Lebanon and on the border. And this is in a context of a broader support to Lebanon. And I'm pleased to be able to say as well that my colleague, the UK Development Secretary, wrote to the Prime Minister earlier this week confirming the UK's commitment of £114 million towards the plan that was outlined at the recent London conference to engage both Lebanese communities and Syrian refugee communities in work, education and training over the coming year.
Russia has promised future movement leader Saad Hariri to help resolve Lebanon's presidential deadlock. Diplomatic sources said Hariri asked Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov during his visit to Moscow for Russian assistance on the issue as a result of its influence in the region, mainly on Iran and Syria. Despite considering the presidential polls an internal matter, Lavrov expressed readiness to help resolve the crisis and promised to exert efforts to push towards the election of a president. Lavrov added that Russia was keen to see Lebanon succeed in overcoming its internal crisis as soon as possible. However, he reiterated that the Lebanese people must solve their problems on their own, away from any external influence. Lebanon has received 3 helicopters from the United States to help bolster its army's capabilities to fend off militant threats along the border with Syria. The army received the Huey-2 choppers worth $26 million during a ceremony at the Beirut Air Base in the presence of interim U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, Richard Jones. Jones vowed to help the army in its fight against terrorists and extremists. With the addition of these 3 choppers, the army now possesses 9 Huey-2 multi-mission helicopters provided by Washington. The U.S. State Department approved an arms deal last June to deliver military hardware to Lebanon worth up to $462 million. This U.S. military assistance comes in the wake of security threats posed by ISIS and Nusra Front, which operate on the northeastern border.
I'm pleased to be here today to mark the latest delivery of the U.S. equipment to the Lebanese Army, the arrival of 3 Huey-2 helicopters. These helicopters, valued at over $26 million, demonstrate America's continued commitment and support for the modernization of the Lebanese Armed Forces airlift capacity. They significantly expand the Army's aerial capabilities and range and improve the Lebanese Army's ability to quickly and efficiently transport reinforcement troops to remote areas of tension along the Lebanese borders in support of the Army's fight against terrorists and extremists. With the addition of these 3 helicopters to its fleet, the Lebanese Army now possesses 9 Huey-2 multi-mission helicopters provided by the United States of America. This is a long-run commitment. Since 2004, America has provided $1.3 billion in its security assistance to the Lebanese armed forces, including both training and equipment. We have no plans to slow down. I want to state clearly that Lebanese-American security relationships has never been stronger. The United States has absolute confidence in the Army's commitment and determination and capacity to defend Lebanon and defend its Lebanese people against terrorist threats.
Refugees living in Lebanon now have access to an artificial intelligence mobile phone app called Karim that they can talk to about their frustrations and fears. The young man behind the special application tells us more.
The artificial intelligence we use for this project is called Karim, the little brother of Tess, who speaks Arabic and who is also adjusted for the cultural specificities. And Karim is really there for the people who had to leave their country and who have been through many hardships and who want to deal with these hardships. So then Karim is there to have conversations with them, to walk them through different ways of feeling better about it.
We have an automated conversation with people, and this conversation talks the user through psychological therapies. At the beginning, we're trying to get people to open up because there's a high trust barrier here. And after they've opened up, we start to understand their emotions and start to provide the psychological therapies that can help them overcome their bad feelings, essentially, and increase their well-being.
Russian combat engineers have arrived in Syria on a mission to clear mines in the ancient town of Palmyra. Meanwhile, Syrian government airstrikes killed at least 10 civilians in the worst ceasefire violation yet in a key rebel bastion east of the capital. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says dozens more were wounded in the raids on Deir al-Asafir, a town in the opposition stronghold of eastern Ghouta. A fragile ceasefire brokered by the United States and Russia has been in place across parts of Syria, including eastern Ghouta, since February 27th. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad told Russia's RIA news agency that the people of Syria are not interested in the Russian military contingent leaving the country either now or in the future. Assad also said he was ready to accept any militant willing to lay down arms in order to avoid further bloodshed in the country. He added that deployment of UN peacekeepers in Syria would be illogical and impossible. And coming up next, at least 10 people are feared dead as a bridge collapse hits India's Calcutta. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Turkey's military has angrily denied suggestions it could be planning a coup against President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Certain media outlets have carried reports speculating over the possibility of a military coup in Turkey, with Erdogan out of the country for almost a week on a visit to the United States. The military said it will take legal action over the reports without specifying which ones, and complained that such baseless news was undermining morale in the armed forces. The army was historically considered a major force in Turkish politics, able to oust governments who it believed were eroding the secular principles of the modern republic set up by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Erdogan, in power as premier and then president since 2003, clipped the wings of the military through a succession of legal cases to ensure its loyalty. Moving on to Europe, clashes broke out on the streets of France during fresh protests over labor reforms just a day after beleaguered President François Hollande was forced into an embarrassing U-turn over constitutional changes. A nationwide strike shut the Eiffel Tower, disrupted train services, and saw dozens of schools closed or barricaded by students. Riot police flooded the streets and clashed with protesters in the western cities of Nantes and Rennes, among 200 demonstrations expected across the country. Police said around 10 people had been arrested in the capital. The socialist government is desperate to push through reforms to France's controversial labor laws, billed as a last-gap attempt to boost the failing economy before next year's presidential election. But protests by unions and students turned violent last week, and demonstrators vowed an even bigger turnout today. South African President Jacob Zuma has failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution when he ignored the order of an anti-corruption watchdog to repay some of the $16 million spent to upgrade his private home. After delivering a stinging rebuke to the scandal-plagued leader, the Constitutional Court gave Zuma 105 days to repay the reasonable cost of non-security related upgrades to his sprawling rural residence in Nkandla in KwaZulu-Natal. The unanimous ruling by the 11-judge court is the latest twist in a 6-year saga over Nkandla. At least 10 people are feared dead after a portion of an overpass under construction collapsed in a congested area of the eastern Indian city of Kolkata. Many people were still trapped under the debris, and efforts were underway to rescue those. Reuters news agency witness said paramedics had worked to free people from a minibus taxi that was crushed in the collapse that took place in the Girish Park area of Kolkata. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a quick recap of our top stories. British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond meets with Lebanese officials in Beirut and vows continued support for the Lebanese military. A diplomatic source says Russia has promised future movement leader Saad Hariri to help resolve Lebanon's presidential deadlock. And Lebanon receives 3 helicopters worth $26 million from the U.S. to help bolster the Army's capabilities to fend off militant threats. Those are your top stories from today. I'm Minute Samim signing off.
بقول له يا سيد أنا رجعت على لبنان، أتمنى إنك ترجع كمان على لبنان.